evening. I'm Major Barrett in Milwaukee. Welcome to a special Republican National Convention edition of America Decides. It has already been...
Welcome to This Week, Those Books. I'm Rashmi Roshanlal, and I'm not in Milwaukee. I'm in London.
And I'm Michael Macy, and while I grew up in Milwaukee, I'm also in London.
So, the U.S. Republican Party National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin is over. The point to note is that it began at the start of this week, Monday, July 15, barely 48 hours after a shocking act of political violence in America. The target was Donald Trump, a former U.S. president, and the Republican Party's presidential candidate this time around again.
What do you think the effect will be?
Well, those gunshots fired at Trump were heard around the world. Though they merely grazed his ear, they arguably achieved something more fatal for the way the world perceives America, its politics, and its democratic culture in the 21st century.
It's true, it's going to be hard for the world to believe that America is engaged in a peaceful run-up to the election on November 5th.
But there has been, hasn't there, an alarming rise in political violence in the U.S. in the past 15 years or so?
Yes, absolutely. There was the 2021 assault on the Capitol, when Trump supporters threatened to hang Vice President Mike Pence. Then there was the intruder who beat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. In 2020, a plot to kidnap Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer was foiled. Congressman Steve Scalise was shot during baseball practice. And in 2011, there was the near-fatal shooting of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. Experts say it's the deadly blowback of years of hate speech by politicians.
Well, we must be fair. America is not alone in this troubling surge of extreme behavior. In June, Denmark's prime minister was physically assaulted on a street in the capital, Copenhagen. In May, Slovakia's populist prime minister was shot. He survived. South Korea's opposition leader was stabbed in the neck in January. And in 2022, in Japan, a former prime minister was shot dead.
These are all countries we don't normally associate with political violence and instability. Well, let's see what we can learn from the reading list.
Sure.
Our first pick is a chapter, The Landscape of Political Violence, by Oxford professor Stathis N. Kalivias.
The professor co-authored the Oxford Handbook of Terrorism, in which this chapter appears.
Yes, the relevant chapter is the very first one. It's a useful piece because it categorizes and explains a phenomenon as chaotic, destabilizing, and ill-defined as political violence.
In fact, I found it particularly interesting that he noted the way political violence can become an omnibus term, because we always say the personal is political.
Yes, but the professor has narrowed it down, and the big takeaway from his chapter is that rich countries such as the United States are not immune from political violence.
Rather dispiriting. I'm afraid our second pick also may seem a bit dark. But the light bit is that it is a gripping read. The Sound of Things Falling by one of Colombia's finest authors, Juan Gabriel Vasquez.
Well, what's the story?
The story is based on Colombia's tragic history of the drugs trade, the regularity of political violence, and the resulting collective trauma. The narrator is a young university law professor in Bogota. And the point about this novel is Vasquez's great skill in writing a political psychological thriller. The law professor starts to investigate the mysterious life of an acquaintance, a dead former pilot who had also been in jail. And in the process, he starts to reconstruct his own buried memories of narco-related violence.
It sounds like a fascinating read.
And so, I would argue, is This Week Those Books.
Makes you smarter faster.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.